Welcome to the Raising Mothers podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Kahn. I'm a wife, a mama to two, and a certified conscious parent coach practitioner. It is my mission to guide mothers in transforming the way they connect, communicate, and collaborate with their teen. Every week, I will be bringing you inspiring, empowering, and educational episodes that will give you the tools you need to consciously raise your teenager. All right, let's do this. I am so beyond excited to bring to you guys Lindsay Law. Lindsay Law is a certified youth and parent life coach. Lindsay helps youth quiet the anxiety that comes from not feeling good enough. And together they work to replace perfectionism with self confidence. Lindsay also works with parents and teaches them how to respond to their teen in a way that promotes connection and acceptance in the relationship. So, welcome to the Raising Mothers podcast, Lindsay.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Ashley. I love talking to parents about connecting with their teens because it's so important.
It is. And I love that you have a heart for teens too. There's thankfully and in a great way, there's so much out there now as far as like parenting and, how to connect with your child and stuff like that. And I feel like it's very heavily focused on the younger years. And in the teen season, there's stuff out there, absolutely, but not as much. And so I was so excited to have found you on Instagram, and I'll share with everyone who's listening how to connect with Lindsay further in the show notes. But I found you on Instagram, and you are just such a light. I love how you show up. I love your wisdom about, parents really learning how to respond to their teens, like you said, so they connect and have acceptance in the relationship. And so I'm excited to share you with everybody so that we can just kind of dive in a little bit more into the adolescent season and how we as moms can show up. Um,
Totally.
Tell us a little bit about your life story and how it kind of led you to become a parent and youth life coach, because you have been through motherhood in all seasons personally.
I have, and I'm still pretty much in all seasons. But and that's the fun thing. And actually, as you were talking, I had this visual of me as a teenager with my mom. And my mom and I actually had a really good relationship. We were good friends, and I would tell her everything. And and I realized that my mom used to always tell people that teenagers were the best. She loved her teenagers. And I didn't really remember that until you were talking, and I was like, "Oh yeah, like I had that positive, influence of my mom talking about how great teenagers were, what a beautiful relationship she had with her teenagers." And so I grew up expecting to have a good relationship with my kids and as with them as teenagers. And I mean that goes such a long way. Such a long way is our approach and our the thoughts we have about having teenagers and interacting with our teenagers. When we're positive about it and excited about it, it creates this environment that's so much more fun and loving and accepting. And so I'm so grateful that was part of my growing up, and I've been able to create that with my own teens. And yeah, so I think I got distracted about what you were asking me.
No, well, I am so happy that you brought that up actually, because our our thoughts are always created by our beliefs. And so if we have this innately deeply rooted belief that the teen years are fun, that they can be enjoyable, that parents can have a great relationship with their teens, your beliefs affect your thoughts, and your thoughts have a direct reflection on your reaction. So if you have this positive belief, you're going to respond accordingly. If there's such a stigma about the teen years, and this isn't to minimize that. Yeah, sometimes the teen years are really hard, and I think we
Totally.
would both agree that in today's world there are a lot of things that we are navigating as parents that our parents didn't have to navigate, as far as like
Totally.
social media. I mean, the list can go. I literally have chills because it's a lot to navigate. And so I don't want to minimize that there are never going to be struggles in the teen years, but I think it applies to all of life. Like all of life, see in the season, there will be challenging parts.
Yes. And I think it's true that, like, sometimes the teen years kind of get that stigma, but then when I talk to people, I'm like, "Yeah, but six-year-olds can be hard and three-year-olds are hard," and there's good and hard things about every stage, and I think if we're just open to that, it's like, "Oh, yeah, of course there's gonna be hard things about having a teenager." Then we're just our brain doesn't get so upset when it happens. It's like, "Well, of course this was gonna happen. We're interacting, things are changing," you know? It's just part of having a child at any stage, and when we're more
Absolutely.
open to it, we don't resist it so much.
100%. And I think too, initially, like in the adolescent years, the brain is going through huge transformation and shifts where the adolescent is really becoming aware of their own identity. And I think parents really struggle with that aspect of like, what do you mean you don't like what I want you to like? What do you mean you have thoughts and opinions that don't agree with mine? And so I think that's where a lot of the conflict can come from.
Mhm. Yeah, like, this idea of differentiation is so important, right? They're supposed to differentiate
Mhm.
from us. They're supposed to have, their own ideas and views, and I think as a parent, that transition is hard if we're not kind of expecting it and being kind of open to it.
Absolutely. And two, just to piggyback off of what you just said, when we, the parent, um, really project our stuff onto our children and have like an enmeshed identity, I think parents all too often personalize the change, and learning to separate like, okay, the parent is their own person and the child in front of them is their own person on their own journey. How can we as a parent come alongside and guide them and support them along their journey, not the journey we think that they should go on or not on our
Yes.
journey?
Yes. I know, and I think sometimes as parents, we have this idea that our job is to create some certain result, right? That these children are supposed to go to university, be respectful. I don't know. We have these ideas and this list of, like, things they're supposed to do, and I think that takes us away from actually seeing the child in front of us. Like,
Totally.
seeing what they're feeling, seeing what they're experiencing because we're so focused on what it's supposed to look like, and it's just really letting go of those ideas and
Mhm.
creating really a safe place for them to be themselves. Like, that is our role as a parent. And when we
Yes.
kind of like let go of all of those other things, it's kind of like, wow, that's actually something I can do. I can be
Yeah.
this safe place. Like, is that my only job? Awesome. I can do that.
Totally. And I love how you just brought that up, like how we think that things should be. And I love that you work with teens to quiet the anxiety, like you said, that comes with not feeling good enough. Because all too often, our children, they're trying to meet these unrealistic expectations that we have, or trying to fulfill the dreams that we have for them. And that naturally causes this feeling of not good enough because it's not their dream, it's not authentic to them.
I know, right? And as parents, we don't mean to do it, and we don't
Totally.
often even realize we're doing it, and I hope we'll get into a little bit of that today about
Yes.
how we can really notice where am I communicating to my kid that they're supposed to be different than they are. Because
Mhm.
we don't intentionally show up to our kids and say, "Hey, I want you to be different than you are. You're
Yeah.
not doing it right." We don't
Mhm.
say those words, but sometimes just because of fear and societal pressures and ideas, that's what we end up communicating unintentionally. So, it's just
Yes.
becoming aware of what those things are.
Totally. And actually, we can go into that now because it's a perfect segue into today's topic of creating what we as moms can do to create this environment for our teens to feel like they belong. Because what you're talking about totally is a huge, huge aspect in creating this environment where they feel like they belong. So, like you said, let's talk about recognizing where the communication comes off, like how we can start to recognize that maybe we are creating an environment for our children to not feel good enough, and what we can do to help them feel like they belong. So,
Yeah. Yeah, and as I was kind of preparing for this podcast, I just that word belonging always reminds me of Brene Brown,
yes.
because Brene Brown talks about this difference between fitting in and belonging. And I actually
Hmm.
just have her quote here. Well, I don't know if it's an exact quote, but it's like, where fitting in expects you to fit your environment, belonging is trusting that your environment will naturally come to fit you and accept you. And so it's so different, right? This idea
Hmm.
of expecting our kids to fit some sort of idea or mold we have for them, and then just allowing them that belonging that they naturally come and, fit into our space.
That is so amazing that you brought up Brene Brown, because I also was like doing some research on belonging and also quoted Brene Brown. And it too, for me also, the difference between fitting in and belonging was so profound, because when kids feel like they don't belong, they will look elsewhere to see where they're going to fit in.
Yes, yes, exactly. And we want our kids to have our home and us as their big people as their
Hmm.
safe place, right?
Hmm.
We want to be their safe place. And so one of the things I notice, and I've noticed this in myself and in parents of my clients and, the world in general, is that we often, because we want our kids to be happy, because we want them to be successful, when they come to us, we often go into fix it mode. We pull out the tools and we're like, okay, let's make this better. Let's, like, we want our kids to feel better. And so we do everything we can to create that result.
Hmm.
But again, unfortunately, what that does is it says to them, whatever you're feeling and thinking right now is not okay and is not acceptable. I need you to change it so I can feel better. And again,
Yes.
we're not intentionally communicating that, but that is kind of what's happening. So I can give an example if that
Yeah,
is helpful.
totally.
So if your teen comes to you and maybe they're really stressed and anxious about an exam they have the next day. And when you're a parent thinking, okay, it's my job to make my teen happy, we might respond in a way that's like, um, oh, you're going to be just fine. Don't worry. You've studied hard. You don't need to feel like that. You've got this. And again, that might feel encouraging, but we're saying, hey, what you're feeling right now isn't valid. Don't feel anxious. And what they really need us to do is validate what they're feeling and say, hey, it totally makes sense that you're feeling anxious right now. Most people feel anxious right before a test. That's okay. And we can even lead them through, where are you feeling it?
Mm.
Tell me more, like, what are you specifically worried about? And even have a conversation with them about that instead of trying to fix what they're feeling.
Absolutely. And honestly, I think this was one of the hardest things for me to learn in my parenting journey, is to be able to be at peace and comfortable with validating their feelings. Because at the end of the day, the root of me wanting to fix their feelings and just make everything better, was because I felt so uncomfortable with it. So really learning for myself to sit with my uncomfortableness in my life, really helped me to be comfortable with their anxiety over a test or their fears or them not being even happy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that we don't always recognize that connection between our discomfort and their discomfort,
Mm-hmm.
but they are very attuned to that. And they don't want us to feel uncomfortable. And so sometimes, and I know we kind of chatted about, like, when our kid how we're going to help our kids want to come to us and talk to us. And one of the ways is we are managing and processing our own emotions so
Mm-hmm.
that when they come to us and they're anxious and sad or frustrated, that we're not all of a sudden taking on their emotion and feeling, so upset, because they don't want us to feel that way.
Totally.
They don't want us to be uncomfortable because then they're like, "Oh, I don't wanna make mom feel uncomfortable," because well, because it's the same with us, right? If mom's uncomfortable, then I'll feel more uncomfortable. And so just really noticing that we need to kind of be in touch with our emotions and where we're at
Mhm.
when they're coming to us, because it makes it harder for them to come to us and say, "Hey, I'm anxious," if it's gonna make us kinda go through the roof and be anxious too. So
Absolutely. And you always hear like hold space for your kids. And I think it kind of can be a hard concept to grasp at first. It's like, okay, what does that mean to hold space? And in processing and through my own experience, really it means just sit with it. Like you don't have to fix or do anything in the moment. Just listen and sit with it.
yeah.
Let them share, and you don't always have to have an answer or, like you said, try to fix the situation. Just be.
Yeah, and most of the time, our kids just want someone to hear them, listen
Mhm.
to them,
Mhm.
and also, when we're able to do that, it allows them the space to do some problem solving, the
Mhm.
space for them to kind of figure things out without us jumping in and kind of trying to solve the problem for them. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And everything that we just talked about. So, like holding space for them, becoming comfortable processing our own feelings and emotion, being comfortable with their uncomfortable feelings and emotion. When we do that, it creates this sense of connection, which is the foundation for our children to feel like they belong. It's just one other outlet, one other thing that we can do to continue building upon this foundation for them to feel like they belong.
Yeah, because if they know that they can show up with any emotion and any thought and any problem or concern they have, they know that it's safe and it's okay. That is what belonging is, right? That is what
Mhm.
connection and acceptance is, when they
Mhm.
feel that safety to be exactly who they are without trying to filter it or hide it. And that is, and again, we're not going to do it perfectly.
Mhm.
I know I don't do it perfectly, but as long as we are intentional about doing it as often as we can.
Mhm. Yes. I love how you brought it up that you won't do it perfectly. And I think it's even a more important to stress that is most of us probably didn't grow up in homes or environments where we had this type of communication or an environment where we felt safe to come to and could feel like we could just be ourselves. So not only are we doing things like differently than what we've known. Like it's a process of a new way of learning and undoing things that we've always known, essentially.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. We all grew up in a different, you know, age, and
Hmm.
it wasn't always okay to
Hmm.
express how you felt. And
Hmm.
um yeah, it's a different environment
Hmm.
that we can create for our kids, which is amazing.
Yes, I love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
The teen years are a profound season in life where the searching for them to feel like they belong is kind of amplified just because of all these changes that they're going through in adolescence and the shifting of the brain and the shedding of the brain and who am I? What do I like? Who are my friends? But essentially, the humans, like, there our natural instinct is to feel like we belong, and it actually starts in utero. And if we go back way back, like the sense of belonging and community started in like a tribal, so the sense of belonging doesn't just happen in teen years. I think it's amplified in the teen years, but it really starts a long time before you're even born.
Yeah, it's like biologically in there, right? And so
Yes.
it makes sense that our teens are seeking for this belonging, right? And
Hmm.
again, if they're not feeling that safety and that belonging in our home, that's when they do look for it outside of the
Yes.
home. And that
Hmm.
can, create some problems with them, with friends, and, you
Hmm.
know, substance abuse or other things, right? Where they're seeking for that connection and belonging somewhere else. And so
Hmm.
we really want to be as intentional as we can about creating that safe place. And one
Mhm.
of the things that I've really shifted as well for myself is that sometimes we end up unintentionally being judgmental of our teens,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
We we maybe think, "Oh, they should be trying harder," or like, "Why haven't they figured this out?" Or we just our brains are just responding in their default unintentional way, like, why aren't they doing what I want them to, right?" And I think when we can notice that
Mm.
and intentionally move to curiosity. And I know there's this phrase, curious, not furious.
Ooh, I've never heard
And
that.
oh, you haven't? Yeah. Isn't that awesome?
Yes.
Because it's so easy for us to respond with like frustration and why are you doing this? And why aren't you doing things the way I want you to? Instead, get really curious and not just with them, but with ourselves.
Mm.
So maybe our teen comes in and like throws all their stuff on the floor. Again, we may want to get furious and, wow, why are you putting your backpack there? You know where the hook is. Yeah, and go on our rant,
Yeah,
right?
how many times do I have to tell you?
Exactly, right? But if we can get curious instead, we might find out that that teen had a really hard day at school because they had a fight with a friend.
Mm,
And if we can just really pause and slow ourselves down before we respond and really focus on that validation and curiosity, we're going to learn things that we would never learn if we just jump to fixing and judging and being upset, right? And so
totally.
it's just slowing ourselves down and getting curious. And it's not always, we don't always have to look at them and say, okay, what's going on for you? Maybe they're not ready to answer those questions, but even getting curious with ourselves. Why is this bothering me so much? Why is this such a problem for me?
Mhm,
What processing of emotions can I do so
mhm,
that this isn't so upsetting for me, so that I
mhm,
can go respond and connect with that child
mm,
that maybe does need to have a talk about something that happened that day, or maybe just is a teenager
totally.
and it's okay.
Yeah, I love how you just said that. Maybe they're just a teenager and it's okay because I think we forget that they're people and they're humans
Yeah.
and they have bad days and they might sometimes just be in a bad mood for no reason. Like us too.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a big deal, and it's so funny. I love how my kids call me out. My kids call me out all the time, and I'm so glad they do because I will go on and on about how messy their desk is. And then if you could see my desk, you would know that I am not following my own rules.
Totally,
And I
totally.
think sometimes when we're looking outside of us and we have these expectations, we we forget that they're just humans doing the best they can, and
Mhm.
they're not going to always have a clean desk. They're not always going to hang up their coat, and it doesn't actually have to always be a huge problem. Sometimes
Absolutely.
it's just like, yeah, that's life. Hey, they come back in the room. Oh, hey, do you mind hanging up your coat? Oh, yeah, no problem. Like it didn't even, you know what I mean? It
Yes.
didn't even have to be a problem. It's just we give them that space and then make a request. And sometimes
Yes.
it's just not even a big deal.
That's so beautiful. I love that example. I think that is so relatable. And I know every parent listening is going to be like, the next time their teen comes in and throws their stuff down, they're going to take a pause and be like, curious, not furious, and be like,
Yep.
is this a big deal? Because I mean, I also can hear some parents being like, well, what if it's repetitive, right? Like, what if my teen never hangs up their stuff? And to that, I
Yeah.
always tell my clients, if it's a pattern, then what boundary needs to be set?
Yeah, and the only way you're gonna get there is by being curious, right? Because
Hmm.
you don't know, like, if you get curious about what is the barrier for them hanging it up or doing that thing you want them to do, you're not gonna be able to understand how to help them and what boundary to set. And so
Yes.
curiosity is what is gonna get you to that place
Hmm.
of being able to say, "Hey, like, when you've hung up your coat, then, then you can have that free time,
For
or you
sure.
can have time on the computer, or whatever it is, right?
Mhm.
That we have expectations that certain things are done before downtime or whatever.
Mhm.
And again, it's going to be different in every home with every kid, because I'm not
Mhm.
saying that that's necessarily what you should do, because
It's so true because every child is so different. And I think that is one of the things in parenting that you start to understand is what works with one child doesn't work for the other. And to really meet your child where they are and get curious about what it is that they need to be able to get certain things done or whatever it might be. As you were talking, I was thinking about a conversation I just had with my son about homework, and we were starting to see a pattern where procrastination and all that kind of stuff, part of it is the teenage brain. So that's why I feel like education on the adolescent brain is so huge, because you just have a better understanding of how they process, what they are actually fully like able to do in certain amounts of times when they do check out and all that kind of stuff. But we were seeing a pattern, and my kids are so different. One of my kids is very like, I'm just going to get things done so then I can relax. Where my other child is like, I need 10 minutes, half
right.
hour, sometimes an hour before I start anything. And they need to decompress before they get things done. So there is no right or wrong answer. It's just,
Yeah.
what does your child need? And how can you, the parent, maybe hold them accountable if they need to create a new pattern?
Yeah, and I love that example because it's like the same situation with two very different
Hmm.
personalities and ways of approaching it. And it's so important to take that into account instead of just going on some default idea that this is how kids should behave or are supposed to behave. They should
Hmm.
do their homework before they have a break. I mean,
Yes,
that's not necessarily true. Some kids need a
totally.
break before they go do their homework. And so
Hmm.
it's really getting in touch with what are your kids' needs
Hmm.
and what helps them get things done.
Absolutely. And I think that's where, like you were saying, judgment and expectations come in, and us, the parent, becoming aware of them. Because for me, I totally had a judgment and an expectation because I was going based on what I would do and what my other child, who's just like me, does, right?
Right.
So I think a lot of parents would be like, well, this one child who doesn't do it like us needs to learn how to do it like us. But it's like, no,
But
they
do they?
but do they? Yeah, they don't. This is their own way, and that's okay. And so to shed that judgment and that expectation really just creates this environment for the child to be like, ah, okay, there's nothing wrong
Yeah,
with me.
right. And
Yeah.
and and they're more likely to flourish when
Yes.
they're given that space to do it how they need to do it.
Mhm.
And I love how you said that it was kind of like this, "Oh, I'm okay," right? Because
Mhm.
that's what we're trying to communicate to them as we
Yes.
validate their feelings, as we get curious. And the one other thing I notice in terms of really trying to express acceptance to our teens, and this is well documented and researched, but we tend sometimes when we want to give praise or communication, we really focus on the end result. It's
Mm.
like, oh, like, did you win the game? Did you get the mark? Did you finish your homework? Did you finish the vacuuming? And we just want to know if that result happened.
Mm.
And and it doesn't mean we don't ever have those conversations, but if a lot of our communication is on that end result, or the praise is on that end result, they start to connect their value and their worth to that result.
Mhm.
And then if they're not able to produce that result, they are very worried and it feels very unsafe for them,
Absolutely.
because then they feel like they are not accepted and loved without creating this result that they think is what's making us happy. Oh, well, mom wants to know, and mom feels happy and good when I do this. And so
Mhm.
I need to keep doing that, which of course could add to some anxiety of feeling that need to produce this result. And then also a reluctance to try new things or go out of your comfort zone, because if you don't create the expected result, then the people in your life are going to be disappointed, or they're not going to give that reinforcement of, hey, you're okay right where you
Mhm.
are. And
Yeah.
so the shift we can make is really trying to focus more of our communication on the process and the learning and the experience that our children are having, even if it's an art project or um, a task in the house,
Mhm.
just communicating about, hey, what did you love about that class, instead
Mhm.
of what grade did you get, and
Yeah.
just kind of expanding the conversations. And
Mhm.
it's not that we never, we're going to talk about results. It's like, hey, who did win the game? I'm curious who won the game.
Mhm.
But then, hey, what was your favorite play? What was the best um, play during the game,
Yeah.
right? And just really get curious about what happened and what their experience was, instead of just that end result, because then they realize, okay, mom cares about all the steps leading to that result, and she's not so concerned about exactly what happens at the end. She's really
Right.
interested in me and what I'm learning and who I am and what I'm experiencing, and the result is just, you know, part of the conversation, but it's not the only focus. And I noticed that for myself, that it's our brains like all or none, black and white, right? Our brains love things to be simple, and so that's where our brain will go, not because we're trying to not see our kid, but just it's just an easy place for our brain to go. Okay, well, how did that end? How did that
Mhm.
finish? What's the result? Because that's just easy for our brain. So we have to
Totally.
intentionally move it to a more diverse kind of focus for communicating. And I
Yeah.
find that that has so much power in our kids feeling that sense of belonging and acceptance and connection, because they're like, oh, wow, mom is interested in all these parts, not just the end. So,
Absolutely. And what you were just saying is not so your child doesn't attach their worth to the end result. So to
exactly.
really communicate in a way that they don't attach, like, I'm good when I get A pluses. I'm good when I led my team to victory. I'm good when I hit a home run. It's just you, like you said, putting in the steps, the work. So really focusing on, you know, that's so cool. I see that you put in a lot of hard work. I see that you were training really hard.
Yes.
Um,
Yes. Yeah. Like,
um,
and praising their effort, not just the result
yes,
and
totally.
their experience, which
Yeah.
it's a simple shift, but I think it's hard for us to notice because our
Hmm.
brains just naturally kind of see the end
Totally.
result just because it's
Absolutely.
easier. It's
Yeah.
less work for our brains. We have to
Hmm.
make them work a little harder. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
For sure. Yeah, and it's like when you praise the end result, then you're creating an environment for your child to fit in. Like you said, oh, I have to do X, Y, and Z for mom to be happy or to notice
Yes.
me. But when you focus more on the process or what it takes to, you know, do something or get somewhere, then that shows like unconsciously communicates to the child like, I see you and all of the effort, all of, all that kind of stuff, which makes them feel like they belong.
Yeah, exactly. Which is what we're trying to do. This safe,
Yes.
amazing place for our teens.
Totally. I was reading this article by Psychology Today, and I'll put a link in the show notes. But the title of it was, or the article was by Dr. Kelly Ann Allen, and it was The Importance of Belonging Across Life, a Developmental Perspective for Our Need to Belong. And so, kind of talks about in every season of life having the need, like we were saying earlier, to belong. But there were a few quotes that I wanted to read because they were just so amazing. And the first one from the article is human connections are important across the lifespan. They begin early, constantly evolving, and extend through old age. And I want to stop right there because where it says they constantly are evolving, I think that's where us as the parent, through practice and mindfulness and awareness, also evolve with our child and what it is that they need in that season to feel like they belong.
Yeah. And can I just throw something in here
Yeah.
that I thought of is that I think sometimes too, when I mean, we're very intentional parents, we want to do the right thing. Sometimes kind of over we try to overconnect.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Where we want to understand and talk and kind of be in their face more. And I
Mhm.
think sometimes we need to just notice that sometimes connecting is actually giving them space.
For sure.
And I think that we don't always see that. We see connection as like, I'm talking to them, I'm interacting with them. And that is true. But sometimes our kids will experience connection with us when we give them that space, when we can tell that they need it. And I think that's
Absolutely.
so important to just notice.
Yeah, no, I'm so happy you brought that up because connection can be unspoken more often than not. And your children just resting in your presence or just coming home and I did that big sigh earlier. That's connection, like connection in the environment.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
thank
Yeah.
you for bringing that up. That's super important. So the quote goes on to say they are impacted internally through human development, externally through changing social landscapes, aka adolescence, and are
Yeah.
dynamically impacted by interactions with responses from others. So I love that last part, impacted by interactions with responses from others. And to your point, the interaction or response can be nonverbal also.
Yeah, totally. And that's why the responses that we have, they can really form actually the way our kids see themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we validate how they're feeling, they allow themselves to validate that.
Mm,
So
yes.
if mom is accepting of my sadness and feeling anxious, I'm more likely to be accepting of it. And if mom gets curious about what's happening with me, then when I make a mistake, instead of judging myself, I can get curious with myself. And I don't always have to be worried about, did I get the result I wanted? It's okay if it didn't work out the way I wanted to. It
Totally.
doesn't mean I'm a failure. It means I'm trying, and it's totally acceptable. And so I think as we shift the way we respond to our kids, we're modeling for them how they can respond to themselves in a more loving, compassionate, accepting way, which is so amazing.
Hmm.
And we can't make them accept themselves. We can't make them love themselves. But when we offer that model for them, they're more likely to be able to do that for themselves.
Absolutely. And that's why it's like so important. Like the parent also works on that, accepting of themselves too. Like, I mean,
Absolutely.
there'll even be times where I like catch myself, like I'm cooking dinner and I put too much of something and I'm like, oh my gosh, I just ruined it. Right. It's like, did I ruin it? It's a mistake.
I know.
So it could be even simple little things like that, like showing your child, like, you're human, you're going to make mistakes and it's okay. The
Yes.
dinner's not ruined. You're not a
Yeah.
horrible cook. It just is.
And and what I love too is when my kids help me accept myself. So,
Mm,
similar example, I remember standing in the kitchen and I think I'd missed an appointment. It totally had escaped my brain and I was realizing it and I was kind of getting down on myself. And
yeah.
my kids are like, "Mom, you're human. It's totally okay." And I was, "You are so wise and amazing." And I think that's the beauty of teaching our kids and modeling these skills for them is that they actually help us
Mm,
offer it to ourselves, which is
yes.
such a beautiful relationship. And I have this visual for myself as a mother, and it's me walking hand in hand with my children. That
Mm,
I'm not, and there's a poem that goes with it, and I'll probably mess it up, but oh, we're walking hand in hand as equals on this journey of life. It's something like that.
so
Anyway,
beautiful.
and it is, I've seen so much truth to that
Yeah.
in my life as I have been able to see them as equal partners on this journey. We have different roles,
Mhm.
but we're really just here to help each other. And I learned so much from my kids. And of course, yes, I'm showing up to lead and teach them as much as I can, but I'm also open to what they're going to teach me.
Yes.
And it's amazing. And I find that with my clients, my teen clients, they blow my mind sometimes. The things they say and the depth at which they understand concepts and the analogies they come up with. I learn every day, and it's such a blessing. These teens are incredible, and I think if we open our minds to learning from them,
Mhm.
we will have such powerful opportunities to improve ourselves
Mhm.
and to be more open and loving. They're amazing. Teens are amazing. That's I
They
just
are, and they're just such a great reminder of how us as adults have taken on all of these beliefs that don't really serve us. Like kids are just so connected to their true authentic self, and as we go through life, we start taking on other people's things to be ours, and it's not. And I think
yeah.
teens especially just have this way of showing us like, let it go.
Yeah, totally. I know. And you were asking me about books I love, and this is one of them. Oh,
Literally, are we the same person?
okay, we have matching books.
Okay, the
I love it
Brene
how we're
Brown.
literally both sitting here with the same book beside us.
I This is like my, what do you call, like, not an encyclopedia, but like a reference. Like this is the best
Okay, we
book.
better tell everyone what we're holding instead of
Yes.
just talking about it.
Okay, go for it. You tell him.
Okay, so Daniel Siegel is a leader in brain science. And so I've got two of his books here. One is The Whole Brain Child,
Yep.
and the other one is Brainstorm, where he talks specifically about the changes that are happening in the teenage brain and different ways we can support our teens. And
Hmm.
the one thing he says in the beginning of this book that I loved was he talks about the different kind of processes the teenage brain is going through. And then he talks about how if we as adults would incorporate some of these ideas and processes into our life, we'd be so much better off.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so it just reminded me of this idea of like that our teens really can teach us how to live a better life if we're open to that. And I don't have it open to tell you exactly what they are. That's another podcast, I guess. But yeah, but get the book, read it because it just gives you some insight into how incredible the teenage brain is and what you can learn from it. So,
Absolutely. And I feel like it helps you connect to them more because you understand what they're going through and you understand like the emotions are part of adolescence. The hormone
yes.
changes, that's a part of it. The impulsivity, that's actually a part of the adolescence.
Yeah.
Um, Risk and reward, part of the adolescent brain. Like their brain literally, like he says, is shedding and it is reforming and transforming. And like, I just, it kind of gives me chills thinking about it because like that is a process. Like of course they're going to be tired, of course they're going to have bad days, of course they're going to be moody. Like what's going on up here from 12 years old to 25 years old, 24 years old, that's a lot of like mental power. Like I just imagine like when I'm researching and studying for a day of work, like I'm
Yeah.
drained. So for teens, like their brain is literally becoming something new. Well, you just have more empathy and compassion.
Yeah, exactly. And admiration
Yes.
for what they are doing and experiencing, and especially in our world today where there are new challenges
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
new things that are directly affecting the neurons in their brain.
Yes,
So
totally.
they've got a lot going on, and I think having a ton of compassion and letting go of some of these supposed tos can go
Hmm.
such a long way to really
Hmm.
opening those channels of connection and communication. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I love that. And I'm like, that's hilarious that we literally both have it sitting here.
I know.
And that we both like had Brene Brown stuff on belonging and fitting in the difference. Like, are we the same
Apparently, we
person?
have matching brains.
I know. Okay. I want to ask you three questions before we end. So the
Okay.
first question is, you working with teens, what do you feel is the biggest challenge that today's teens are facing with their parents?
Yeah, I think really it is this desire for connection and acceptance for exactly where they're at. And I think that as parents, again, we have this idea of what our kids should be doing, how they should be doing in school, what things should look like. And I think that's really difficult for our teens when they're not showing up that way. And so we really have to be intentional about expressing that acceptance and that
Mm,
love for them. And again, that doesn't mean we just let them do whatever they want, because we can still have boundaries and we can still have rules with at the same time as accepting them. And
mhm,
I think one place I see parents getting confused is this idea of validation. We can express to our teen that we see them and hear them without agreeing. We don't have to agree with what they've done, what they're doing. We can still validate their experience and what they're feeling and not agree. And there's still kind of a result or a consequence of some action, right?
mhm.
But just knowing we can show up and still see them where they're at and say, "Oh man, I know this totally sucks. This feels terrible. I'm right here. Tell me about it."
Yeah.
And it's okay.
Yes, I love that. That is so,
Yeah.
so powerful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, the second question. These last two questions are what I ask every guest before we end.
Okay.
And so the second question is, what would you tell your younger self or your younger mother self
Oh, my younger
looking
mother
back?
self. Yeah. I was actually thinking about this the other day. We'll see if I can remember what I was thinking. I think just everything's not such a big deal.
Mm,
Let things just be more casual, more fun, more relaxed. It doesn't things don't have to be as big of a deal as we think they are. And I
mhm,
think as I've gone in my mothering journey, I mean, I have a 2-year-old and an 18-year-old, and so, and a few in between. And when I look back, like the things I remember with my first child, I was so worried and stressed about so many things when she was younger. And now that I have a 2-year-old, 18 years later, it's a very different experience. Some of the, it just doesn't matter as much the way they're doing things. If I don't know, even the house being clean, just
mhm,
some of it, it just doesn't really matter. What matters is that our kids know that we love them, that they're seen and accepted for exactly where they are at. Even if they're depressed and they're not getting out of bed, even
mm.
if they're struggling in school, they need to know that that's okay and so important. So,
Yes,
yeah,
that's
that's what I would tell myself.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I know that'll resonate so much with so many moms because
Yeah.
the amount of unrealistic expectations, perfection, and yeah, idea of how we think things should be that we place on ourselves is very hard to meet. And it all too often goes on to our child. And we really miss out on just the beauty of the whole journey, really.
Yeah, because it's supposed to be messy for all of us.
Hmm.
And I think when we can kind of just accept and enjoy the messiness of it, it just feels better.
Yeah. What do they say? A beautiful mess.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, last question.
Yeah.
What would be one thing that you would want to leave every mother with today? What would you
Mm,
want to tell? What would you want to say to them, or what would you want to leave them with? It could be anything.
yeah. I think I think what is most important is that all parents have a ton of compassion for themselves, no
Mm,
matter where they are at in
mm,
their parenting journey. Because I know for me, over the last couple years, when I realized I was not validating, I was not getting curious, it felt heavy for a little bit.
Mm,
It it felt like I was doing it wrong. And when I was believing that I was doing it wrong and not having compassion for myself and thinking I should have known better, that was much harder for me to shift and create that change I wanted to create. So if you're a mom listening to this and you're like, "Oh man, I've been judging my kid. I've been not validating their emotions," and I want you to have so much compassion and
mm.
love for yourself in that space. Because as you love yourself, you're more likely to create the change that you want to create. So, love to all of you and just so much compassion for each of you in your journey.
Ugh, that's like a mic drop right there. And
Yeah,
I think that is the perfect way to close because it is easy to listen to things and be like, wow, I have so much work to do. But to affirm that we all are, it's a continuous work. No one's perfect. Even Lindsay and me doing what we do. I know I could speak for myself, but I'm still learning every day too. And every day, new awarenesses, new things to shed, new beliefs that I've become aware of, thoughts, judgments.
absolutely.
We're all human. We're all in this together, but it is amazing to have a community like this where we can learn from each other because that's where change starts. So, thank you for sharing that.
Totally.
And
No
thank
problem.
you for being on here. I will put all of the links how you can connect with Lindsay more in the show notes. I'll put the book link. And yeah,
Yeah, and can I just share one thing? There's a freebie that I've created that kind of shares some of these communication shifts. And so I can put the link there,
yes,
and it's just kind of like a one sheet poster that you can put up
perfect.
in your house or wherever that kind of just reminds your brain
I
of all these
love
things.
that. Yes, I will definitely put that link in the show notes too so they could download and print that out. Thank you, Lindsay, so much for joining us today. You are amazing, and
Oh,
I'm
well,
an
thank
honor to
you.
have you.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. I'm literally so excited that you took the time to hang out with me here in this space, and I would absolutely love to connect with you more. You can find me on Instagram or visit my website at ashleycahn.co. That's ASHLEYKAHN.co. I'll see you there.